It was a typical Monday afternoon in Berlin. The streets of Moabit were busy and filled with people. Among them was 14-year-old Georgine Krüger. She had just stepped off her usual bus, minutes away from home. But somewhere between that short walk and her front door, she vanished. No screams, no struggle, no witnesses. What should have been an ordinary day started one of Berlin's most haunting mysteries. It was a case that baffled investigators for over a decade, involving a girl who seemed to disappear into thin air, and a family left waiting for answers that never came.
Mr. TrueCrime.
This is the case of Georgine Krüger. On September 25, 2006, Georgine followed her usual routine. She stepped off her school bus just as she did every afternoon. Her apartment, where she lived with her mother and grandmother, was only 200 meters away. She was expected to arrive home by 2 p.m. at the latest, but she never did. Somewhere in that slight stretch between the bus stop and her doorstep, Georgine disappeared. One moment, she was right there, so close to home, and the next, she was gone. It was the beginning of one of Berlin's most unsettling mysteries, a case that would take over a decade to solve. In the summer of 2006, 14-year-old Georgine Krüger moved to Berlin with her mother and younger sister, hoping for a fresh start after her parents' divorce. Her older brother, Tommy, who was 22 then, remained behind, living independently. Adjusting to life in a new city wasn't easy. Being the new student at school came with its challenges, and while her striking beauty and fashion-forward sense caught the attention of many boys, Georgine struggled to form close friendships, especially with the girls in her class. Unaware of the envy her looks inspired, she remained focused on what truly mattered to her: fashion, makeup, and her dreams of one day making a name for herself. By September, Berlin was finally starting to feel familiar, and life seemed to be settling into place. That Monday afternoon, September 25, 2006, was supposed to be like any other. Just minutes from home, Georgine got off her usual bus at Stendale Street and Rathenauer Street. The apartment she shared with her mother, grandmother, and younger sister was only 200 meters away. She was expected home by 2 p.m., but she never arrived. 15 minutes later, her grandmother called her phone. There was no answer. She tried again, still nothing. At first, she assumed there was a simple explanation. Maybe Georgine was talking to a friend or had stopped somewhere briefly. But as the minutes passed without sign of her, concern quickly turned into panic. Georgine had never been late before. She was responsible and reliable, and by the time her mother, Frau Krüger, got home in the evening, the worry in the apartment had turned into full-blown fear. Hours had passed with no word from Georgine, and every unanswered call worsened the situation. Her grandmother had been trying to reach her for hours, but there was still no response. The longer the silence stretched, the more specific they became that something was wrong. Georgine's mother contacted family and friends, hoping for any information about her whereabouts, but no one had seen or heard from her. Her son in Neukölln hadn't heard from her either and rushed to Moabit to assist. As the hours passed without a sign of Georgine, they went to the police to file a missing persons report. At first, Berlin police followed standard protocol. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to go missing for a few hours. In most cases, they returned home alone. Officers reassured the family, advising them to stay alert and wait, believing Georgine would soon resurface. But something about it did feel right. There were no signs of conflict at home and no history of running away. She hadn't packed extra clothes, taken money, or indicated that she was leaving. Nothing about her disappearance seemed intentional. Georgine's phone remained off, with no calls or messages. Her bank account had no transactions, and none of her friends had heard from her. The growing uncertainty stirred fear within the household. By morning, it was undeniable. This wasn't a case of a teenager skipping school. Something had happened to Georgine, and time was slipping away. Investigators wasted no time retracing Georgine's last known movements. They questioned her family, classmates, and school staff, searching for anything to explain where she had gone. They examined her weekend activities and reconstructed her Monday routine in detail, but nothing pointed to her leaving voluntarily. Georgine had been looking forward to an important opportunity, and her sudden disappearance simply didn't add up. Sensing the urgency of the matter, Berlin police escalated the case. It was immediately forwarded to the local missing persons unit, which launched a full-scale investigation. Their first step was revisiting Georgine's key contacts, her school, friends, and family. Detectives re-interviewed everyone, piecing together the hours leading up to her disappearance. They needed to understand precisely what had happened before she got off that bus. During their investigation, detectives uncovered a key detail. Georgine had a deep passion for acting, dancing, and modeling, and she carried herself with a confidence that made her stand out. She took pride in her appearance, favoring stylish outfits that reflected her bold personality. Her long dark hair and striking features only added to her presence. While some girls her age struggled with self-image, Georgine embraced the attention. She wanted to be noticed, and more than anything, she wanted to be famous. Despite her family's skepticism about an entertainment career, Georgine had never let their doubts stop her. She had already taken steps toward her goal, and in August 2006, she attended a casting session. Then on Friday, September 22nd, 2006, just 3 days before she disappeared, she received a message from the casting agency. They offered her a possible role as an extra in the popular TV series Turkish for Anfänger during the autumn holidays. It wasn't a starring role, but it was a start. That entire weekend, it was all she talked about. She was overjoyed, telling anyone who would listen about the opportunity. She had already decided that on Monday, right after school, she would call the agency to accept the offer. But that call was never made. For detectives, this changed everything. A teenager thrilled about her big break wouldn't just walk away from it, not when she was so close to something she had wanted for so long. The fact that she never made the call wasn't just unusual, it was a sign that something had stopped her before she ever got the chance. And now investigators had to figure out what, or who, had stood in her way. Initially, police considered the possibility of a voluntary disappearance. Teenagers ran away all the time, often after arguments or personal struggles. But nothing about Georgine's case fit that pattern. There were no warning signs, no distress, no fights, no second thoughts about her future. She counted the days until she could accept the casting agency's offer. She wasn't just looking forward to it, she was determined. If she had chosen to leave, she would have had to abandon everything. Her dreams, her family, and the future she had been so excited about. Would a girl who had fought so hard for her chance at success suddenly throw it all away? That didn't add up. The more investigators looked into her life, the clearer it became. She had no reason to disappear alone. With no sign that she had left willingly, the investigation took a darker turn. Georgine hadn't walked away. Something or someone had stopped her from coming home. And from that moment on, the missing person case became a search for the truth, uncovering a crime that had left no trace. By the evening of September 27, 2006, 2 days after Georgine Krüger was last seen, and with no plausible explanation for her disappearance, investigators suspected foul play. The case was officially escalated and the homicide division took over. This was no longer just a search for a missing teenager. It was now a criminal investigation, focused on determining what had happened to her and who was responsible. The longer a person remains missing, the harder it becomes to retrace their steps. Investigators moved quickly to reconstruct Georgine's final moments. At 1:50 p.m., Georgine Krüger stepped off the bus at the intersection of Stendeler Straße and Rathenauer Straße. She knew the route well. Her home was just 200 meters away. But this time, she never made it. 16 minutes later, at 2:06 p.m., her phone went dark. The last signal placed her in the same area as her home, meaning she was still nearby when she disappeared. That left investigators with one chilling fact. Somewhere in that short window of time, Georgine was taken. Did someone approach her? Was she lured away by someone she trusted? Or had a predator been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? In the middle of the afternoon, someone had to have seen something on a busy street. But no one came forward. There was no commotion, no witnesses, and no trace of where she went. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, and thus the case got complicated. An extensive search operation was launched to find Georgine. The urgency of the situation was apparent. If she had been taken, every second that passed made it less likely that she would be found alive. The priority was to search the entire stretch between the bus stop and her home. It was a short distance, just 200 meters, but something had happened to her within that space. Officers scoured every hiding place, hoping to find even the slightest trace of where she had gone. More than 300 buildings along Stendaler Strasse were searched, from basements and attics to courtyards and storage areas. Police worked with landlords and building managers to gain access, carefully inspecting any space where someone could have held Georgine. The search expanded beyond her immediate route. Parks, nearby canals, and abandoned lots were combed through to uncover anything that could point to her whereabouts. Authorities also turned their attention to waste disposal routes. If Georgine, or evidence connected to her disappearance, had been discarded, there was a chance it had already been removed. Garbage containers were examined and collection points searched. The investigator looked for anything that might have been thrown away in the hours following her disappearance. Clothing, personal items, signs of a struggle, anything that could explain what had happened to her. Despite these exhaustive efforts, the search was in vain. There were no signs of foul play. It looked like she had vanished into the air. Despite the determination to find Georgine, investigators ran into immediate roadblocks. Without clear evidence of a crime, they had no legal authority to force entry into private properties. They could ask for access to basements, attics, and shared spaces, but entry depended entirely on the cooperation of landlords and residents. Many were willing to assist, but officers could only look where they were allowed without a warrant. Locked storage units, sealed-off areas, and private apartments remained out of reach, and there was no way to know if Georgine had been taken into one of those places. The limitations weighed heavily on the search. Officers knew they were only skimming the surface, unable to see what might be hidden behind closed doors. If someone had taken Georgine, they would have had a head start. Without the ability to search everywhere, the trail grew colder by the minute. With no suspects in sight, investigators turned to the public, hoping someone might have seen her. Life-sized posters of Georgine were plastered at bus stops, street corners, and throughout Moabit, displaying her exact height and the clothes she had been wearing the day she disappeared. The goal was simple, to trigger someone's memory, but posters weren't enough. Police took it a step further, deploying loudspeaker vans to drive through the neighborhood, broadcasting details of her disappearance. Residents were urged to come forward with any information, no matter how insignificant it might seem. A €5,000 reward was also announced, a last-ditch effort to encourage anyone with knowledge of Georgine's whereabouts to step forward. Leads trickled in, but none held up. People reported possible sightings, but none could be confirmed. Others called in tips, but they led nowhere. Each new information only brought them back to the same devastating reality. They had nothing. Desperate to find clues, uniformed officers combed through parks, canals, and abandoned buildings. They checked alleyways and empty lots, hoping for even the slightest clue. For Georgine's family, life had split into two timelines, where she was still with them and where she had disappeared without a trace. Her mother, Wisna, refused to accept the worst. As long as there was no body, there was still hope. Every time the phone rang, she braced herself, clinging to the desperate belief that it might be Georgine. Days turned into weeks, then months. Still, there was no sign of her. Her mother refused to give up hope, clinging to the belief that Georgine was still alive somewhere. But as time passed without a single clue, the silence became suffocating. What made this case even more unsettling was the complete lack of evidence. In a neighborhood filled with people, Georgine had disappeared in broad daylight, just steps from her home. Yet there were no witnesses who saw her in distress, no security footage capturing her movements, and no physical trace to explain where she had gone. Without a body, investigators couldn't confirm whether she was dead. Without proof of life, her family couldn't accept that she was gone. The case remained open, not just in the police files, but in the minds of those who loved her. Georgine was caught in a cruel limbo, and until there were answers, she would remain exactly that, missing. The months dragged on, and the urgency of the initial investigation began to fade. But while other cases came and went, Georgine's case remained open. Detectives refused to file it away as just another unsolved disappearance. Someone had taken her, and until that person was found, there was no moving on. Over the years, police received more than 300 tips, ranging from possible sightings to anonymous claims. Every tip had to be thoroughly investigated, but none led to a breakthrough. Some were false leads, while others were too vague to follow up on. Despite the lack of progress, the case remained active, with detectives reviewing it whenever new information surfaced. But as time passed, it became clear that traditional investigative methods wouldn't be enough. They needed something new, something that could finally expose the truth. And eventually, that moment would come. By late 2006, about 8 weeks after Georgine disappeared, Detective Thomas Roof officially took over the case. For him, this wasn't just another unsolved file. It was a case that needed answers. From the beginning, he clarified that he wouldn't let it go cold. Roof reviewed every piece of evidence, re-examined witness statements, and oversaw more than 400 house-to-house interviews. He repeatedly reconstructed the timeline, searching for anything that might have been missed. Even when no new leads emerged, he refused to close the file. By this point, the search for Georgine was about more than following standard procedures. It was about persistence. The reasoning was simple. If Georgine had been taken somewhere nearby, she could still be hidden in one of the buildings. There was also the possibility that someone had seen or heard something suspicious, but hadn't thought much of it. Many people don't respond to posters or public appeals, but when asked face-to-face, they might recall small but essential details that could help the investigation. This method had proven effective in past cases, but in Georgine's case, it led to nothing. No one saw anything, and no new leads emerged. Investigators weren't just searching for Georgine. They were searching for someone who might have been watching her. They needed to understand the neighborhood, the people who lived there, and anyone who might have taken an unusual interest in her. The person responsible had to know the area well enough to act quickly and without being seen. But despite knocking on doors, questioning residents, and retracing her steps, investigators found nothing. No one suspicious, no signs of anyone lurking, and no explanation for how a girl could vanish in broad daylight just steps from home. Georgine wasn't the kind of girl who went unnoticed. She carried herself confidently, and her bold personality and fashionable style made her stand out wherever she went. Her long, carefully styled hair, her love for makeup, and how she put together her outfits weren't just expressions of her personality. They made her unforgettable. But that also meant she may have drawn the wrong kind of attention. Every day she got off the bus at the same stop. Every day she walked the same short route home. If someone had been waiting for the right moment to strike, they wouldn't have needed to follow her far. But was it an opportunity that presented itself instantly, or had someone been planning to take her long before that Monday afternoon? As time passed, Georgine's case remained open, but it was no longer the only case investigators had to handle. Berlin, a city with a high crime rate, had new homicides, missing persons reports, and violent crimes occurring every week. Each fresh case required immediate attention, demanding resources and manpower. For many cases like Georgine's, this was the point where investigations grew cold, not because detectives stopped caring, but because there were no new leads. Without evidence to pursue, cases get deprioritized. But Georgine's case never faded into obscurity. Despite the years passing, her file remained active. Investigators continued reviewing the case, hoping that time, or a new witness, might bring forward the missing piece of the puzzle. They refused to let it become another mystery. Years after Georgine's disappearance, a routine police report led investigators down an unexpected path. Just a minor case of verbal harassment. On its own, it seemed insignificant. But as detectives looked closer, the details pointed back to one place, Stendeler Strasse, the same street where Georgine had vanished. So investigators launched another effort to solve the case. They returned to the streets of Moabit, knocking on doors and speaking to neighbors, hoping that time had loosened lips or sharpened memories. And this time, a name surfaced, one that hadn't drawn suspicion before: Ali. Back in 2006, Ali had lived in the same apartment complex as Georgine's family. Unemployed and in his early 30s, he spent most of his days sitting outside, watching the street. Neighbors remembered how he paid particular attention to teenage girls, making inappropriate comments, prying into their personal lives, and asking about their relationships. He never physically threatened anyone, but his presence made many uncomfortable. Despite his financial struggles, Ali had an obsession with luxury. Expensive cars and designer clothes were things he could never afford, yet he spoke about them constantly. He spent hours at a Turkish cafe in the building, blending in just enough to be noticed but never forming close friendships. For years, no one had thought much of him. But with Georgine's case still unsolved, investigators now had to ask, had they overlooked someone who had been right there all along? With Ali now a prime suspect, investigators began digging into his past. It wasn't long before they uncovered a disturbing 2011 case, one that bore chilling similarities to what they believed had happened to Georgine. Ali had lured a 17-year-old neighbor into his basement, promising to give her a new mobile phone. At first, she was hesitant, but eventually she followed him. The moment she stepped inside, she realized there was no phone. Instead, Ali locked the door and confessed his romantic interest in her, claiming he would leave his wife to be with her. When she rejected him, his demeanor changed. Without warning, he struck her on the back of the neck and forced her to the ground. She struggled, screamed, but she couldn't break free. The girl later told police that Ali's basement was more than just a storage space, it was his hideout. Investigators later confirmed her detailed description of the room. Despite his threats to keep her silent, she found the courage to report the attack immediately. In 2012, Ali was convicted of assault and bodily harm, yet he received only a year and a half of probation. Throughout the trial, he maintained that the girl had followed him willingly and fabricated the accusations. But the evidence told a different story. For investigators working on Georgine's case, this revelation changed everything. Ali had already proven he was capable of violence. He had already lured a teenage girl into his basement before. The question now was, had he done the same to Georgine? Ali's past was more than just troubling. It fit a pattern investigators couldn't ignore. Two teenage girls, the same neighborhood, the exact calculated approach. He had already lured one girl into his basement under pretenses. Had he done the same to Georgine? The more detectives dug, the more unsettling the similarities became. Georgine's last known location was just meters from Ali's apartment. Phone records showed that Ali and her device were connected to the same cell tower on the day she vanished. It wasn't proof, but a red flag they couldn't dismiss. Had Georgine unknowingly walked past his door? Had Ali been watching her for weeks, waiting for the right moment? The possibility was chilling, but investigators still had a problem. No solid evidence. Search dogs had been brought in years earlier. Nothing. His basement had been checked. Nothing. There were no witnesses, no DNA, no forensic proof tying him to Georgine's disappearance. And while the phone records raised suspicion, they weren't enough to make an arrest. Ali had slipped through the cracks once before. This time, detectives weren't about to let that happen. But they needed something even more substantial if they couldn't find physical evidence. A confession. Despite mounting suspicions against Ali, the case hit another frustrating dead end. Investigators knew that without solid proof, they couldn't bring him in for questioning. He would deny everything, just as he had during his 2012 trial. There had been no witnesses to place Georgine with him, no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and no apparent motive beyond unsettling speculation. The pieces had been there, but without something concrete to tie them together, the investigation again lost momentum. Despite his disturbing past, Georgine had vanished without a trace, and Ali remained just out of reach of the law. Her family had spent years searching for answers, trapped in the torment of not knowing. Every passing year made it less likely that the truth would ever be uncovered, yet they refused to let her memory fade. But without the final piece of the puzzle, justice remained beyond their grasp. As the investigation into Georgine Krüger's disappearance stalled, police knew they needed a new approach. There was no forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, or confession. But there was Ali. His past, behavior, and proximity to Georgine made him their strongest suspect. The challenge now was to make him slip up. Rather than interrogating him outright, investigators took a calculated risk. They turned their attention to his growing financial troubles, hoping to exploit his desperation. Surveillance of Ali's phone calls revealed how deep he was in debt. He had a serious gambling problem, owed money to multiple people, and was struggling to keep up appearances. His obsession with luxury cars and expensive clothing had finally caught up with him. He was drowning financially. Sensing an opportunity, the police launched an undercover operation. The goal was simple: get close to Ali, gain his trust, and see if he would reveal anything about Georgine. But they had to do it without arousing suspicion. If Ali had been responsible for Georgine's disappearance, he had kept that secret for a decade. Getting him to slip now would require a carefully crafted plan. To get Ali to talk, investigators needed to do more than just watch from a distance. They had to get inside his world. That meant finding his weaknesses and using them against him. His biggest vulnerability? Money. So they sent in an undercover officer posing as a wealthy businessman looking to open a car wash in Berlin. The setup was perfect. Ali spent most of his time at a Turkish cafe in his building, and that cafe became the stage for the operation. The officer became a regular, striking up casual conversations, blending into the community and slowly gaining trust. The businessman's story was simple but effective. He was looking for someone to help run his car wash, and the job came with a generous salary. This offer seemed too good to pass up for Ali, who was struggling to stay afloat. He wanted in. Eager to prove himself, Ali started spending more time with the businessman, trying to impress him. And just as police had hoped, the deeper he got, the more comfortable he became. It was only a matter of time before he let something slip. Ali's trust in the undercover officer grew as the operation continued. He saw this wealthy businessman as his golden ticket, a way out of his financial struggles and into the life he had always dreamed of. When the officer invited him on a business trip to Frankfurt, Ali jumped at the chance. To him, this was an opportunity to prove himself and secure his future. He was determined to show that he was reliable, hardworking, and the perfect choice to manage the car wash. But despite Ali's growing reliance on this fabricated friendship, he still hadn't slipped up. The police needed to push further. That's when they introduced a second undercover officer, codenamed Susie. She posed as the businessman's girlfriend, and her mission was to befriend Ali's wife. The setup was perfect. The two couples spent more time together, hosting dinners, taking trips, and strengthening the illusion of genuine friendship. The goal was simple: get close enough that Ali or his wife would reveal anything that could connect him to Georgine's disappearance. But nothing surfaced. The operation had gone on for months, and while Ali was fully invested in this new life he believed he was building, he never mentioned Georgine. The police had to be patient, but time was running out. Not everyone in Ali's circle was as blind as he was. His sister began to grow suspicious. She questioned the legitimacy of this so-called businessman and his lavish plans. Something about their sudden arrival in Ali's life didn't sit right with her. She even doubted the authenticity of the relationship between the officer and Susie. But Ali refused to listen. He was too caught up in his ambitions, too focused on the promise of wealth and success. His desperation to escape his financial troubles clouded his judgment, and he ignored every warning sign. And that would be his downfall. With months of undercover work yielding no confession, the police made one final move. They introduced a third undercover officer, someone who could push Ali into dropping his guard. The new agent was presented as the officer's cousin, a man with deep ties to the criminal underworld. Unlike the others, he didn't hide his past. Instead, he bragged openly about his involvement in illegal activities, subtly testing Ali's comfort level with crime. Eager to impress his wealthy new friends, Ali quickly bonded with his cousin. Their connection intensified during a visit to a brothel. At first, Ali resisted, maintaining the image of a devoted family man. But under pressure and temptation, he eventually gave in. That night revealed two sides of Ali: the struggling husband and father desperate for a way out of his financial troubles, and the man willing to betray his wife and children when an opportunity arose. The cousin, who covered the cost of the encounter, made it clear where the money came from: crime. And Ali didn't seem to mind. It was precisely the opening investigators needed. The more comfortable Ali became in this new world, the more likely he would slip up. And he was about to make his biggest mistake yet. With no confession and time running out, investigators knew they had to make one final push. To cement their undercover operation, they took an extraordinary step. They rented a plot of land and built a fake car wash from the ground up. They drafted an official-looking contract, making Ali believe his new job was finally within reach. Every detail was designed to reinforce the illusion, convincing him that his financial struggles were about to end. But the operation hinged on one thing: the undercover cousin getting Ali to talk. If Ali continued to keep his secrets buried, then Georgine Krüger's case might remain unsolved forever. It was now or never. 2018, a sudden and unexpected twist reignited hope, if only for a brief moment. An unidentified man called the police, claiming he knew where Georgine Krüger's body had been hidden. He was adamant that he had nothing to do with her disappearance, offering only a set of coordinates before abruptly hanging up. Investigators worked quickly to trace the call, but the number led nowhere. The tip, however, was too specific to ignore. A search team was immediately dispatched to a dense forest on the outskirts of Berlin. They combed through the area, searching for any sign of Georgine. But again, there was nothing, no remains, evidence, or clues. Had the caller been toying with police? Was it a cruel prank or a deliberate effort to mislead the investigation? No one could say for sure. What should have been a breakthrough became yet another dead end, leaving Georgine's fate as much a mystery as ever. In a renewed attempt to provoke a reaction from Ali, investigators launched a bold strategy. Following the mysterious phone call, they distributed new flyers across Berlin featuring Georgine's face. But this time, there was something different: a QR code. Anyone who scanned it could listen to the voice of the anonymous caller in the hopes that someone might recognize it and come forward with new information. Meanwhile, detectives devised a more personal trap. Knowing Ali's obsession with luxury cars, they rented a Porsche, his favorite model, outfitting it with a hidden listening device. As an added psychological trigger, they placed one of the new flyers in the back seat, ensuring that Georgine's face would be in his line of sight. The plan was simple. Undercover officers arranged for Ali and his wife to take a ride in the car, waiting to see if the sight of Georgine's photo would stir something inside him. At first, Ali didn't seem to notice, but when his wife finally spotted the flyer, everything changed. His mood shifted, his body tensed, and he immediately began speculating about the mysterious caller. He wondered out loud what information they might have and whether the police were getting closer. Later, Ali took the flyer to his usual hangout, the Turkish cafe where he spent most of his days. He showed it to his friends there, pretending to be concerned about the case. He acted like he wanted to help the police, even discussing theories about what might have happened to Georgine. To investigators, this behavior was a major red flag. Why was he suddenly trying to insert himself into the conversation for a man who had never shown public interest in the case? It wasn't just suspicious. It was as if he was trying to control the narrative before it spiraled out of his grasp. As Ali's anxiety grew, detectives intensified their plan, weaving him further into their web. The undercover cousin confided in him, carefully planting a story designed to test Ali's morality and his willingness to cross a line. According to the cover story, the cousin was being blackmailed by his girlfriend, who claimed to know a dark secret from his past. He admitted to Ali that he had once killed someone, and now the woman was threatening to go to the police unless he stayed with her. Desperate to make the problem disappear, the cousin turned to Ali for advice. Ali listened intently. He sympathized with his friend, offering support, but he didn't reveal anything about Georgine. Investigators knew they had to push him further. That's when the cousin made an offer that Ali couldn't ignore. He proposed paying him 150,000 euros to get rid of the girlfriend, whatever it took. Ali eagerly agreed to the plan, with his debts mounting and the promised car wash job still out of reach. He didn't hesitate. He started discussing logistics, asking about the woman's weight, whether a vehicle would be needed, and the best way to carry out the attack. For the first time, Ali was willing to take action. He wasn't just thinking about breaking the law, he was planning it. And for detectives, this was the moment they had been waiting for. As Ali detailed his plan for the supposed crime, the trap around him tightened. Detectives had spent months earning his trust, leading him to a position where he finally felt comfortable enough to speak freely. During one of his conversations with the undercover cousin, Ali let something slip. He admitted that he had researched how to dispose of a body. It was a crucial moment. The undercover agent didn't press him too hard, letting Ali believe he was sharing secrets with a trusted friend. Investigators needed him to keep talking, to reveal something undeniable. Then at last he did. Ali spoke about Georgine Krüger for the first time. He described her as a beautiful young girl who passed his home every day after school. On September 25, 2006, he was sitting outside as usual when he saw her get off the bus. She looked happy, smiling, cheerful, utterly unaware of the danger that awaited her. That's when Ali made his move. He approached Georgine and asked if she could help him carry some bags into his basement, offering to pay her for the favor. She trusted him. He was a familiar face, a neighbor, and so, without hesitation, she followed him inside. Once they were alone in the basement, everything changed. Ali admitted that he struck Georgine on the head. She screamed. He panicked and hit her again, harder this time, until she collapsed. She was still alive, but barely. That's when reality sank in for Ali. If she survived, she would tell someone, and he would go to prison. So he made a decision, a final, irreversible choice. He strangled Georgine Krüger until she stopped breathing. His confession was horrifying, but it matched everything investigators suspected. The timeline, the location, and Georgine's trusting nature all fit. But Ali wasn't finished. He went on to describe what happened after the murder. He kept her body hidden in his basement for 3 days before wrapping it in an old rug. Then he dumped her in the trash, knowing the garbage would be collected and taken to the city's incineration plant. By the time anyone realized Georgine was missing, her remains had already been destroyed. Ali's confession was the breakthrough investigators had spent over a decade waiting for. It was enough to warrant his arrest, and in December 2018, 12 years after Georgine Krüger vanished, police arrived at his home to take him into custody. Despite thorough searches of his properties, no physical evidence linking him to Georgine was ever found. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no remains, nothing that could definitively tie him to the crime scene. But his own words had sealed his fate. His confession alone provided the most substantial grounds to close the case. Once in custody, Ali's willingness to talk vanished. During formal interrogations, he refused to say a word. When officially charged, he remained silent, refusing to acknowledge his confession or provide further details. For over a year, as he awaited trial, Ali and his family believed he would walk free. Their confidence stemmed from the lack of forensic evidence. With no body, witnesses, or physical proof, it seemed impossible to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt. But the prosecution had more than just his confession. They presented his past criminal conviction, drawing undeniable parallels between his previous attack and Georgine's disappearance. The similarities were chilling. The method, the manipulation, the violence, it followed the same pattern. The evidence may not have been physical, but it was damning. Ali had done this before, and now he would finally face justice. In the end, it was Ali's own words that sealed his fate. His chilling confession convinced the judge and jury that he was responsible for the murder of 14-year-old Georgine Krüger, a young girl whose bright future had been stolen in an instant. On March 17, 2020, Ali was sentenced to life in prison for a crime he had managed to keep hidden for nearly 14 years. But despite the weight of his admission, Ali later claimed he had been set up. He insisted that he had only gone along with the undercover operation to protect the cousin's girlfriend and intended to expose the plan to the authorities all along. His sudden reversal painted him as a man desperate to escape the consequences, but his confession, delivered in chilling detail, left little room for doubt. Ali's family never accepted the verdict. They remained convinced that he was wrongfully convicted, claiming that the police had spent so many years chasing the case that they simply needed someone to blame. They argued that the investigation's massive scope had pressured authorities into pinning the crime on Ali, whether he was guilty or not. While the case is officially closed, the whole truth of what happened to Georgine Krüger may never be known. Her family finally had the answers they had waited years for, but the absence of her remains left an unshakable emptiness. And as for Ali, whether his conscience will ever compel him to fully admit his guilt remains uncertain. The case of Georgine Krüger is as frustrating as it is tragic. A 14-year-old girl disappeared in broad daylight, yet it took over a decade to identify a suspect. And even now, many questions remain unanswered. Why did it take investigators 10 years to properly question the neighbors? Had they done so immediately, could Georgine's case have been solved sooner? Could her life have been saved? Then there's the justice system's failure. Ali had a history of violence, including an assault on a 17-year-old girl, yet he received only a year of probation. A repeat offender is given another opportunity to walk free and strike again. Many see this as a systemic issue, where leniency in sentencing allows dangerous individuals to remain in society, free to claim new victims. And then there's the controversy surrounding his conviction. Nobody, no DNA, no security footage. Only a confession, drawn out through an elaborate undercover operation. Did police genuinely uncover the truth? Or did they manipulate their way to a confession? Would this case have stood in another country? Was Ali pressured into admitting to something he didn't do? When financial desperation is involved, people can say or do almost anything. Many would go to extreme lengths for 150,000 euros, even if they had never committed a crime before in their lives. Justice was served. But was it justice? Georgine's body was never recovered. Her final moments remain a mystery. And despite the conviction, doubt still lingers. But one thing is sure, Georgine deserved better. Better from the system that failed her, better from an investigation that moved too slowly, and better from a world where justice often comes too late. As Georgine's story leaves us with many questions, some stories show evil much closer to home. Click on the next video to see how a man's terrible crime, killing his mother and stepfather, was uncovered after a shocking find in a U-Haul truck.